Please, take a deep breath, close your eyes for just a moment, and let your mind drift back in time. Try to remember a very specific scent from your childhood. Perhaps it is the sharp, sweet smell of exhaust from a passing Trabant on a humid summer evening, or the heavy, comforting aroma of freshly baked bread mixed with the metallic dust of a bustling street. Do you remember how it felt to hold a cold, heavy aluminum coin in your small hand, running to the store with a sense of immense purpose? Today, we are going to travel back to the Hungary of the 1970s and 80s. We are going to look at 20 completely normal, everyday things we all did back then, things that were woven into the very fabric of our daily lives, but which today are completely illegal, banned, or strictly forbidden by modern safety rules. By the end of our journey, we will arrive at a deeply touching memory about how we used to work together in the autumn fields, a memory that might just bring a warm tear to your eye. Welcome back to your youth, my friend. Before we dive into these beautiful, dusty memories, let us think about how differently time flowed back then. In those decades, time was not something we constantly chased. It moved slower, deliberately, without the frantic rush of today's digital world. Waiting was not a waste of time, it was simply a part of life. You waited for the bus, you waited for your favorite song on the radio, and you waited for your friends by the designated clock in town. There is a modern myth that because we lacked advanced technology, instant messaging, and constant entertainment, our lives were somehow poorer or less fulfilling. But you and I know the absolute truth. Life was vastly richer in sincerity and human connection. When you looked someone in the eyes, you were truly present. We did not have screens to hide behind. Our social network was the bench outside the apartment building, the local market, and the small weekend gardens where families gathered. We lived boldly, with scraped knees and hands dirty from the earth, embracing a kind of raw, unfiltered freedom that modern regulations have slowly erased. Let us honor that lost freedom today. And now let us remember the traditional winter pig slaughter, a profound ritual that today would make modern health and safety inspectors simply faint. Do you remember those freezing winter dawns in the countryside? The sky would still be pitch black, the air biting cold, and you could hear the loud crunch of snow under heavy boots. The whole extended family, along with neighbors and friends, would gather long before sunrise. The men would start the day with a strong, burning shot of homemade plum palinka to warm their blood and steel their nerves. Today, strict European Union regulations dictate exactly how meat must be processed, tracked, and stored, making this rustic, unregulated backyard tradition practically illegal in its original form. But back in the 1980s, it was a vital, communal celebration of survival and abundance. Children would run around the yard, breathing out thick clouds of white steam, eagerly waiting for the moment they could eat the freshly roasted pork fat or the fried blood mixed with sweet onions. There were no sterile gloves, no stainless steel hygienic tables. There were just worn wooden boards, sharp carbon steel knives, and generations of inherited intuitive knowledge. The smell of burning straw used to singe the pig filled the village air, a scent that meant winter had truly arrived. We did not worry about microscopic bacteria or cholesterol levels. We worried about whether the sausage would be spicy enough, finding deep joy in working side by side with our loved ones. Let us shift our memories to the family car, usually a trusty Trabant, a Wartburg, or if you were lucky, a boxy Lada. Think about how we travelled as children. Today, parents face hefty fines and legal trouble if a child is not strapped into a high-tech, reinforced, scientifically tested car seat. But back then, the back seat was an open playground. You probably remember bouncing around on the slippery faux leather seats of a Ziguli as your father navigated the bumpy, pothole-filled country roads. There were absolutely no seatbelts in the back, and no one even considered that a problem. Sometimes, if the car was packed with relatives heading to Lake Balaton for the weekend, you might have even sat in the luggage compartment of a station wagon, watching the road disappear behind you through the dusty rear window. The air inside the car was a potent mix of cheap gasoline, strong tobacco smoke, and the distinct, cardboard-like smell of the Trabant interior. We would roll down the windows to catch the warm summer breeze, hanging our arms at, feeling completely invincible. It was dangerous by today's strict standards, undeniably so, but that unbounded freedom of rolling around in the back seat with your siblings, fighting over who gets to sit near the window, is a memory of pure, unadulterated childhood joy. Another completely normal task that would spark absolute outrage today was sending young children to the local ABC supermarket to buy alcohol and tobacco. Can you picture yourself as a 7 or 8-year-old, clutching a small piece of paper and a few heavy aluminium coins? Your father or grandfather would send you down to the corner store with a very specific mission. You would walk up to the counter, barely tall enough to see over the glass, and confidently ask the cashier for a pack of Symphonia cigarettes and a bottle of Trabant beer. Today, selling these items to a minor is a serious crime that could cost a store its license and result in heavy police fines. But back in the 1970s, the cashier, who probably knew your entire family by name, would just smile, hand over the unfiltered cigarettes, count your small change, and maybe give you a piece of cheap fruit candy as a bonus. There was an unspoken web of trust in the community. No one assumed you were going to smoke the cigarettes yourself. You were just being a helpful child doing your chores. Carrying that string bag, known as a checker, with the bottles clinking softly against each other as you walked home, made you feel incredibly grown up and trusted. Do you recall the specific atmosphere of an autumn afternoon when the air turned crisp and the whole neighborhood smelled of smoke? Burning fallen leaves and garden waste right in your own backyard was a quintessential autumn ritual. Today, environmental laws and local municipal decrees have strictly banned open fires and leaf burning in populated areas due to air pollution and health concerns. But in our youth, raking the dry brown walnut and chestnut leaves into massive piles was a family event. We would spend hours gathering them, listening to the dry, satisfying rustle beneath our wooden rakes. Then, as twilight approached, a match was struck. The thick, white smoke would billow up, blanketing the entire street in a fragrant, hazy fog. We would stand around the smouldering piles, faces glowing from the gentle heat, our clothes soaking up that rich, earthy campfire smell that would linger for days. Sometimes we would toss a few potatoes into the hot ashes, waiting patiently for their skins to turn black and crispy. Eating that ash-covered, scorching hot potato, tossing it from hand to hand while blowing on our dirty fingers, was a culinary experience that no fancy modern restaurant can ever replicate. And speaking of homemade things, we must talk about the secret art of distilling palinka at home. Now, to be fair, the authorities always try to regulate alcohol, but in the 1980s, almost every countryside shed or garage hid a secret, completely illegal copper still. Today, distilling strong spirits without proper government permits, tax stamps and strict laboratory testing is a serious offense. But back then, making palinka was an act of quiet rebellion and deep cultural pride. You could smell the fermenting fruit mash, the chefre, from a mile away. Plums, apricots, or pears gathered from the weekend garden were mashed and left to ferment in huge plastic barrels. The men would gather in the dimly lit shed, watching the clear liquid slowly drip into a glass demijohn. They would test the strength by seeing how long the bubbles lingered on the surface when the bottle was shaken. This fiery, unregulated spirit, often reaching incredibly high alcohol volumes, was the universal currency of the time. You paid the mechanic with palinka, you thanked the doctor with palinka, and you toasted at every wedding and funeral with it. It was completely untaxed, unregulated, and absolutely essential to the social fabric of the country. Let us take a walk to the playgrounds of our childhood, places that today would be immediately condemned as extreme public hazards. The modern playground is a soft, padded, colourful paradise made of rubber flooring and rounded plastic edges. Our playgrounds in the concrete housing estates were built like military obstacle courses. They were constructed purely of heavy iron, thick steel pipes, and solid, unforgiving concrete. Do you remember the giant iron globe you could climb into, which older kids would spin so fast you could barely breathe? Or the enormous rocket ship climbing frame with no safety nets, just a sheer drop onto hard-packed dirt or gravel? The seesaws were made of heavy wooden planks that, if you jumped off suddenly, would send your partner crashing painfully to the ground. If you fell and scraped your knee on the rough concrete ping-pong tables, there were no wet wipes or antibacterial sprays. You just went home. Your mother dabbed some stinging red mercurochrome on the bloody scrape, and you ran right back out to play. Those dangerous metal structures taught us balance, bravery, and spatial awareness. We survived those iron jungles, and they made us resilient, tough, and deeply aware of our own physical limits. Think back to the ubiquitous presence of cigarette smoke. Today, smoking is strictly confined to designated outdoor areas, banned from restaurants, public transport, and workplaces. The 1970s and 80s were a completely different world. People smoked absolutely everywhere. It was completely normal to light up a Munkas or Fekska cigarette inside a train compartment, leaving the tiny enclosed space thick with a permanent blue haze. Even in hospital waiting rooms, you would find heavy glass ashtrays overflowing with crushed butts. Teachers smoked in the staff rooms, office workers smoked at their desks, and parents smoked in the living room while watching the evening news on the black and white television. As children, we were constantly immersed in this second-hand smoke, viewing it simply as the natural scent of adulthood. The heavy velvet curtains in the cinemas and the upholstery in restaurants held the stale, sweet smell of tobacco permanently. While we now know the severe health risks and appreciate the clean indoor air of today, the image of people deep in conversation across a cafe table, framed by the curling smoke of their cigarettes, remains an incredibly cinematic and nostalgic symbol of that bygone era. Do you remember the days when we were junior entrepreneurs, collecting scrap metal and paper for pocket money? Today, child labour laws and strict health and safety regulations at industrial recycling centres would never allow unsupervised children to wander in dragging hazardous waste. But going to the local scrapyard, known as the MEH station, was a serious business for us. We would spend weeks gathering old newspapers, tying them into neat, heavy bundles with rough twine. We scavenged the neighbourhood for rusted iron pipes, broken car batteries, and discarded aluminum pots. I can still hear the screeching wheels of the small, handmade wooden carts we used to drag our treasures across the asphalt. We would arrive at the dusty, loud scrapyard, surrounded by towering piles of rusted metal and barking guard dogs. The gruff man in the blue overalls would weigh our haul on a massive mechanical scale and hand over a few shiny coins. It was dirty, dangerous work, handling sharp, rusty metal without gloves, but the reward was pure magic. That money bought us sticky ice cream, sunflower seeds, or a ticket to the local cinema. It taught us the true value of hard work and the sweet taste of absolute independence. Let us talk about a phenomenon that was entirely normal then, but would result in calls to Child Protective Services today. We were the latchkey kids. In Hungarian, we called it being a kulsos gyerek. With both parents working long shifts in factories or offices, children as young as 7 or 8 were left entirely unsupervised from the moment school ended until the evening. We wore our house keys on a long string or shoelace around our necks, tucked under our shirts. We navigated the sprawling, grey concrete jungles of the housing estates completely alone. We walked home, let ourselves in, heated up a plate of food on the gas stove, and then went back outside to roam the neighbourhood until the streetlights flickered on. There were no mobile phones to track our locations, no adults hovering over our games. We drank water directly from rusty garden hoses, explored abandoned construction sites, and settled our own arguments without adult mediation. The entire neighbourhood was our playground, and the collective eyes of the elderly women looking out from their balconies provided a loose, silent security net. That immense freedom gave us a profound sense of self-reliance and street smarts that modern, heavily supervised children rarely get to experience. Imagine the sound of a handbell ringing down your street early in the morning. This was the signal that the milk vendor had arrived. Today, raw, unpasteurized milk sold directly on the street from the back of a cart violates countless food safety and hygiene laws. Milk must be sterilized, homogenized, and sealed in plastic or cartons. But back then, we would run out to the street carrying our own enamelled metal pitchers or aluminium cans. The vendor, often a local farmer, would ladle the fresh, warm, frothy milk directly from massive metal churns into our containers. It smelled sweet, grassy, and raw. When we brought it home, our mothers would immediately put it on the stove to boil. Do you remember the anxiety of watching the milk on the stove, knowing that if you looked away for even a single second, it would boil over and create a terrible, burnt mess on the burner? And when it cooled down, a thick, rich layer of yellowish cream would form on the top. Some of us hated that skin, fishing it out with a spoon, while others fought over it, spreading it on fresh bread. It was real, living food, connected directly to the land and the animal, completely free of modern industrial processing. Think about the weekends spent at the family garden plot or the small summer house near Lake Balaton. Building and repairing these little sanctuaries involved materials that today require people in hazmat suits to handle. I am talking about asbestos, specifically the famous corrugated Eternit roofing sheets. Today, asbestos is recognized as a highly dangerous carcinogen, strictly banned and heavily regulated. But in the 70s and 80s, it was the miracle material of the DIY era. Fathers and grandfathers would cut these grey sheets with hand saws to build roofs for tool sheds, outhouses, and small weekend cabins. There were no protective masks, no safety goggles, no ventilation protocols. The fine grey asbestos dust would cover their clothes, their hands, and the grass where we played. We would even use broken pieces of asbestos sheets to draw chalk lines on the concrete for our hopscotch games. It is terrifying by modern standards, and thankfully we know better now. But back then, it was just another weekend project. The smell of fresh wood, the sound of the saw, and the sight of family members working together in the summer heat, building a tiny piece of paradise with whatever cheap materials they could find, remains a powerful memory of resilience. How about the way we shared drinking water in public? Hygiene standards today demand single-use plastics, personal water bottles, and contactless dispensers to prevent the spread of germs. In our youth, public hydration was a communal affair. Do you remember the blue or yellow public water fountains on the street corners, where you had to push down a heavy iron handle to get a gush of cold water? Or the soda water vendors, the Zordash, pushing their carts through the neighborhood? At the market or the cemetery, there was often a single dented tin cup chained to the water tap. Everyone in the community, from the dusty construction worker to the elderly grandmother, drank from that exact same cup. If you were polite, you might give the rim a quick wipe with your thumb or the sleeve of your shirt before taking a deep gulp of the freezing cold, metallic-tasting water. We shared germs continuously, completely unworried about viruses or bacteria. We trusted our immune systems, and we trusted each other. That shared tin cup on a rusty chain was a symbol of equality and communal living, a stark contrast to the highly individualized, sanitized world we navigate today. Let us reflect on the atmosphere inside our school classrooms. The dynamics of discipline have changed so drastically that the accepted methods of the past would result in immediate dismissal and criminal charges for a teacher today. Physical discipline in schools was completely normal. If you talked during class, threw a piece of chalk, or failed to pay attention, the consequences were swift and physical. Do you remember the sharp sting of a thick wooden ruler slapping against your open palm? Or the teacher grabbing you by the sideburns or the earlobe and pulling you up from your desk to stand in the corner for the rest of the lesson? Teachers wielded absolute, unquestioned authority, and the most remarkable part was that if you went home and complained to your parents that the teacher had hit you with a ruler, you were likely to get another scolding from your father for misbehaving in the first place. Parents automatically sided with the educators. While we can all agree that violence has no place in modern education, that era instilled a profound, almost fearful respect for authority and order. The classroom was a place of absolute silence when the teacher entered, a level of discipline that is hard to find in schools today. Let us take a trip to the western border in the late 1980s. Travelling abroad, specifically to Austria, became a national obsession. leading to practices that modern customs and border control would treat as serious smuggling operations. This was the era of Gorenje tourism, when Hungarian families travelled to Vienna to buy consumer goods like freezers, televisions, and VCRs that were unavailable or too expensive at home. But taking foreign currency out of the country was strictly limited. So, we became a nation of amateur smugglers. Can you remember the intense anxiety at the border crossing? Your mother might have hidden tightly rolled Austrian shillings inside her socks or stitched secret pockets into the lining of your winter coat. You sat in the back of the car, sweating, as the stern customs officer with the green uniform leaned into the window and asked if you had anything to declare. The smell of fear mixed with the faux leather of the car seats was palpable. Today, moving money across borders is done with a quick tap on a smartphone app, perfectly legal and seamless. But back then, hiding hard currency in your underwear to buy a colour television was a thrilling, nerve-wracking adventure that bonded families in a shared conspiracy. When we were sick, the medical treatments our grandmothers prescribed were heavily steeped in folk traditions that modern paediatricians would find absolutely horrifying. The concept of child-safe medicine was very loose. If a baby was crying from the pain of teething, it was common practice for a mother or grandmother to dip her finger into a glass of strong homemade palinka and rub it directly onto the infant's swollen gums. The alcohol would numb the pain, and the baby would fall into a deep sleep. If you had an upset stomach, you were given a spoonful of bitter herbal liqueur. If you had a terrible cough, they might wrap your chest in a towel soaked in hot lard or strong spirits. There was even the practice of brewing weak poppy seed tea to help restless children sleep through the night. Today, giving alcohol or unprescribed sedatives to an infant is rightfully considered child abuse. But in those days, it was done out of pure love and a reliance on the wisdom of past generations, long before pharmacies were stocked with scientifically formulated, fruit-flavoured children's syrups. We survived on those strange, potent remedies nurtured by the warm, calloused hands of our grandmothers. Do you remember standing on the edge of a dusty highway, holding out your thumb? Hitchhiking was an incredibly common and socially acceptable way to travel across the country. Today, getting into a car with a complete stranger with no GPS tracking and no way to call for help is considered incredibly reckless and dangerous. But in the 1970s and 80s, the roads leading to Lake Valence or the Balaton were lined with young people carrying heavy canvas backpacks. You would stand there, feeling the hot asphalt radiating heat through the thin soles of your shoes, watching the cars approach. When a stranger in a dusty Skoda or Wartburg pulled over, you just threw your bag in the back and hopped in. The trust was mutual and absolute. You would spend the next 2 hours engaged in deep philosophical conversations with a driver you had never met before and would never see again. People helped each other get to where they needed to go. It was a beautiful, informal network of solidarity. The sheer adventure of not knowing exactly when or how you would reach your destination is a kind of romantic freedom that has been entirely lost to modern scheduling and safety anxieties. Let us recall the distinct smell of a typical gas station, the old A4 stations with their analogue pumps. The fuel we used back then, specifically the super benzene, was heavily leaded. Today, leaded gasoline is globally banned because of its catastrophic environmental and neurological health effects. But in our youth, that sweet, intoxicating, toxic smell was just the scent of travel and machinery. If you owned a 2-stroke car, a Trabant or a Wartburg, you did not just pump gas. You had to physically mix the gasoline with thick motor oil right there at the pump. You would pour the fuel, add the oil, and sometimes literally rock the car back and forth by pushing on the doorframe to mix the liquid in the tank. The exhaust fumes that these cars produced were a thick, blue, choking cloud of lead and unburned oil. We breathed it in deeply every day on our way to school or work. We had no concept of catalytic converters or unleaded fuel. A mechanical ritual of fueling up, the grease on your hands, and that sharp chemical smell in the air was an inseparable part of the driving experience, a sensory memory that defined an entire era of motoring. Let us think about the food we ate at school buffets or summer pioneer camps, specifically the legendary gyros kenyér, the fat bread. The way this food was prepared and stored would violate every single modern food safety and temperature control regulation. There were no glass-fronted refrigerators holding individually wrapped sandwiches. Instead, there were massive metal trays sitting out on the counter in the warm ambient air for hours. Thick slices of cheap, white, spongy bread were heavily smeared with pure white pork fat. They were generously dusted with vibrant red paprika and topped with thick, pungent rings of raw purple onions. The fat would slightly melt and seep into the bread if it sat out long enough. We would buy this during the 10-minute school break, our hands dirty from playing, and eat it ravenously while running down the hallways. We did not worry about food poisoning or cross-contamination. That thick layer of fat provided the cheap, high-energy calories we needed to keep running, playing, and growing. It was humble, heavy, honest food. The taste of that sweet paprika mixed with the sharp bite of raw onion is the true flavor of a 1980s childhood. Think back to the sheer joy of riding a bicycle. If you had a classic Chapel camping bike, or maybe a sturdy older model passed down from your sibling, you knew true independence. Today, cycling involves lightweight composite helmets, reflective neon vests, flashing LED lights, and dedicated bike lanes. In our childhood, safety gear was completely non-existent. We rode barefoot or in flimsy sandals, pedaling fiercely down dirt roads or jumping off concrete curbs. We did not wear helmets. The very idea would have been laughable. If it got dark, we relied on a small, friction-driven dynamo that rubbed against the front tire, making a loud whining noise and providing a faint, flickering yellow light that went out completely the moment you stopped pedaling. We rode with friends, sitting sideways on the back rack or balancing precariously on the front handlebars. We crashed into ditches, scraped our elbows raw, bent our wheels and just hammered them straight again. We experienced the rush of the wind in our uncovered hair, learning to navigate the physical world through trial, error, and a few inevitable bruises. It was glorious, dangerous, and absolutely liberating. And finally, let us arrive at a memory that truly defines the spirit of our generation. Children working in the agricultural fields during the autumn harvest. Today, pulling children out of school to perform manual agricultural labor sounds like an archaic violation of children's rights. But in our era, the autumn harvest, the őszi betakarítés, was a mandatory and deeply bonding experience. For a week or two, normal school lessons were completely suspended. The entire class, along with the teachers, would board a noisy, shaking Icarus bus and head out to the cooperative farms. We spent 8 hours a day in the freezing mud, picking heavy potatoes, gathering apples, or cutting grapes during the vintage. Our hands would be numb from the cold, our boots caked in thick, heavy clay. It was hard, exhausting physical labor, but oh, the camaraderie. We sang songs on the bus ride home, shared thermos flasks of hot, sweet tea, and sat around campfires eating the very apples we had just picked. We felt incredibly useful, a vital part of the adult world, contributing to the nation's harvest. The shared exhaustion created friendships that lasted a lifetime. It was not exploitation to us, it was a grand adventure. As we look back at these 20 memories, it becomes clear that we do not simply miss the dangerous playgrounds, the leaded gasoline, or the lack of modern safety rules. What we truly miss is the profound feeling of our youth. We miss the raw, unfiltered connection to the world and to each other. We miss an era where trust, community, and shared responsibility replaced the rigid, sterile regulations of today. We lived bravely, we loved deeply, and we survived it all with stories worth telling. If this journey back in time brought a smile to your face or a warm tear to your eye, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video so we can continue to preserve these precious memories together. Now, I want to ask you, which of these things did you experience the most? What is your favorite memory from those beautiful, unregulated days? Please, share your stories in the comments below. Let us read them, remember together, and keep the spirit of our youth alive.